Greetings and welcome to the Introduction to Astronomy. In this week's exploration of the solar system, we will talk about two spacecraft, the Rosetta spacecraft and the Philae lander, and learn what they've taught us about our solar system. So let's get started here. And what are these two spacecraft? Well, again, they were combined together. So Rosetta was the main spacecraft, Philae was the lander. And they were launched on March 2nd of 2004, and the idea was to travel to a comet known as 67P Churyumov-Gerasimenko, and that's to study a comet. So what they were going to do was orbit and land on a comet. So each of these craft would do one of these things. Rosetta was the orbiter. It was going to orbit around the comet, while Philae would land and study the comet directly from the surface. And the whole idea as well was to study the comet as it approaches the sun, so as it's getting more active. Now, as comets approach the sun, they get heated up and material gets vaporized, and not only from the surface, but also below the surface, causing jets of material to come out. And this was the first time we could actually study it up close. Now, we've seen some of it before from flyby craft that have gone a little closer to comets, but to really study a comet, we have to be up close and see the relatively small nucleus. And some of the things that we've learned here, first of all, it reached the comet on August 6th of 2014 and detected a number of things, including complex organic molecules. It found a high deuterium ratio in water. Now, the organic molecules, could living particles have been brought to Earth in comets in the distant past? That is certainly a possibility, although we find some differences in the organic molecules that we find out in space as compared to the ones here on Earth. There is also that high deuterium ratio, which kind of tells us that comets probably didn't bring water to Earth if this comet is typical of comets in terms of their deuterium ratio. Deuterium is hydrogen with an extra neutron attached. And that means that it's a little bit different, a little bit heavier. And deuterium is something that only formed in the Big Bang. So its presence is not created anyplace else. It's only existed from the Big Bang. And looking at the ratios, why would that ratio be different than the ratio here on Earth? And that's a good question, and kind of leads us that if this comet is typical, that water did not come to Earth from outside of the solar system. Now, Philae was the lander, and it did land on the surface, but part of its mechanism failed and was unable to anchor it to the place where it landed. The idea was to send a harpoon as it landed into the comet and hold the lander in place. Unfortunately, it bounced into a shadowed area, and contact was lost. So that was one of the problems with it here, is that we were unable to use that. And once the batteries died down, of course, we had no way to recharge the solar cells, and it had very limited contact once its battery started to run down. Got as much science out of it as we could during the time it lasted, but unfortunately, one of those cases where it was not as successful as we would have hoped. End of the mission on September 29th of 2016, and it was crashed into the comet, as we usually dispose of spacecraft to leave little room for them to contaminate anything beyond what they've already studied. So on September the 29th, it was crashed into the comet and ended its mission after about 2 years of orbiting around the comet and studying it as it made its approach into the sun and then turned and headed back away from the sun. So it gave us a much better study and a better understanding of a comet. So let's go ahead and finish up here with our summary. And what we've looked at today is that Rosetta and Philae were launched to orbit and land on a comet. Rosetta orbited Comet 67P for a little over 2 years. Philae did land on the same comet, but ended up bouncing and was unable to recharge its batteries, which vastly limited its mission. So that concludes this week's discussion of the exploration of the solar system on the Rosetta and Philae spacecraft. We'll be back again next week for another exploration of the solar system video. So until then, have a great day, everyone, and I will see you in class.